this second part, so from the continuation of the first part, now we're looking at this slide. So basically, you need to explain in greater detail why Singaporeans are more resentful of today's foreigner present when it in itself is a migrant nation. So as you can see from this slide, I've written about the financial threat that the new immigrants pose. Perhaps we can look at the background context first. Now, I'm going to move on to this slide and let's look at the picture. It states that no human being is illegal. Now, I feel that this is an interesting statement because of its emphasis on human rights. The concept of citizenship emerged in Singapore and Southeast Asia in general terms because of colonial legacy. Now, there was a lot of pressure on the colonial powers to demarcate boundaries because they were competing amongst themselves to get a share of the land's wealth. Now, if we look at the background context here, the first wave of immigration to Singapore occurred in around 1832, when the free trade policy that the British implemented attracted many mainland Chinese. Now, so that's the reason why like our grandparents generally come from the south, and that's why most of us also speak Hokkien, and therefore they migrated to Singapore because of economic opportunities. Now, perhaps this means they didn't see a brighter future where they come from. Now, this is an important point because they might not have been from wealthy backgrounds in the first place. Now, many foreigners who recently came also became blue-collared workers in Singapore. Now, aren't they similar to our grandparents in that sense? How is then xenophobia justified, and why are the waves of immigration in the past and recent times very different? Now, it must be understood that xenophobia is partly a result of the government's lack of concern over immigration's impacts on its people's social lives. As foreigners are considered economically viable units to help the economy progress, despite the low birth rate, it becomes tough for complete integration to occur. It depends on the immigrants' own initiative and locals' openness rather than any governmental help because they're only concerned about economics. Now, this is why both sides may not necessarily feel the need to step out of their respective comfort zones. Now, therefore, both sides are responsible in ensuring that xenophobia doesn't actually prevail. However, we must understand that realistically speaking, no society is truly inclusive or has become more inclusive in that matter. The truth is, society has become less inclusive because of the changing demographics. This doesn't only apply to Singapore, but also to other countries where sometimes anti-Semitism or anti-Muslim sentiments emerge because of the trends in the Middle East that spill over to Europe through acts of terrorism, such as the Charlie Hebdo case, as you all know, and some of the shootings that occurred recently in Belgium and Norway. So, thus, if the question is a general one, talk about terrorism more broadly because it is a very interesting phenomenon that many people don't really understand. No, analyze it much deeper and you'll be able to triumph over history students because they also study that. Now, let's direct it back to the question. Has your society become more inclusive? After looking at the background information I've told you, we can say that no, it hasn't, because the construction of the other has occurred. Now, I'm going to focus on this slide that I have crafted for you. Okay, so in this slide, uh, a lot of us probably are relatively familiar with this movie. So now, in this movie, it basically talked about how there is a construction of the other where bullying actually happens, like in a educational institution. So over here, if you guys didn't know this, the movie poster at the right is actually the original movie. The Mean Girls is just an adaptation of what actually the real movie is. Now, the difference is that, of course, the left movie is more bimbo in that sense, but the one on the right is basically about popularity, happiness, and suicide. So basically, this means that in any kind of institution, politics always occur. Now, why do I use these posters in the first place? Now, in Singapore, this happens in an educational level as well. Now, of course, we know that there are a lot of different nationalities that are currently studying in most Singaporean schools. Now, the reason why tension exists is because of uh, the scholarships that have been given by the Ministry of Education. Now, this becomes a very sensitive issue because, like, people argue that the scholarship is only valuable if it is given to the locals because resources are limited. But if, like, let's say you can examine this further and perhaps even make your essay more interesting and relatable because not every JC actually has a scholar. So this means that you'll probably come from a better one, or at least I've given you this information. So the main thing isn't really about finding things that are too chim in that sense, like too intelligent, but it's about finding like something that's interesting and also unique because not everybody will do it. So, and then you can give like some analysis to the phenomenon as well because that's the reason why people get A for GP. Now, I also want to highlight this particular slide that I'm going to show next. So this is about the value of things such as International Friendship Day and Racial Harmony Day. Now, you may think like, okay, these are totally lame things, but is it really necessary? Is it or is it not? Now, the reason why it's there in the first place is because Singapore is a very young nation, right? So this year we're going to celebrate SG 50. It's only 50 years old. And now the thing is that because the construction of the identity is so complex and so fragile in that sense because everybody is pretty much like from a different racial background or like now there are a lot of intermarriages between Chinese, Malays, and Indians and even Eurasians. So it is during times of crisis such as um, recently Lee Kuan Yew's death that rally people together and attempt to find unity. But this is not permanent, or is it? Because it's only during a certain period of time that you're going to do it. So how about the rest of the time, right? So this is the reason why these kinds of celebrations of diversity are slightly kind of like needed in that sense because if not then how do people actually find their sense of identity, right? So the society is already fragile and so it needs the kind of support that it needs in order to survive because this is not like the states where the country has been there for a very long time. So they also identify themselves as Americans much more easily rather than anything else. Okay, so okay, I'm gonna change slides. Now, now after I've given all this information, I'm gonna talk to you about like another technique that you need to know for your essay. So there must be a very good reason why you choose a stand that you're going to be giving in your essay. Now, this is just the introduction, but I'm giving you a lot of details because it's pretty important because it will distinguish whether you get an A or a B. Now, a lot of students get A because they have specific examples and the way they write actually reflects their intelligence. So it's more about the writing style and also the content. So it's really about a lot of different factors, right? So I'm gonna, so anyway, choose one specific aspect of the essay that you feel can be a good introduction. Now, as you can see here, I'm focusing on the issue of immigration in my definition of what inclusive is. Now, we will be talking about other aspects later. Now, what I've bolded in red is what I've already talked about, so I'm not going to go